Hi everyone, thanks for joining RADWIN course webinar for TDD synchronization. Today we are going to discuss about synchronization. The ones who participated radio planning during the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks, I introduced to you the RADWIN hour planner and radio planning, and I mentioned that synchronization is important to be considered when we are doing a planning, a radio planning to a site, whether it is a point-to-point site or point-to-multi-point site, and it need to be considered. So today we are going to discuss about synchronization. The first association when we discuss about synchronization is interrupt. Just imagine what happens when you are interrupting your wife while she's explaining to you what to do, or she's talking and you are interrupting. First, she will get angry. Second, you don't know what to do because you start to improvise, and then it will become more interrupting. So this is the case. The case is not to interrupt the transmission. So let's start. Why synchronization is needed? Synchronization method, inter and intra synchronization, site synchronization, RADWIN simplified synchronization solution. Now, when we are deploying a site or deploying a point-to-point or point-to-multi-point site, RADWIN utilize a time division duplex, TDD. So in TDD, both link direction operate in cyclic manner on the same radio frequency. It means that when we are in collocated frequency, only one end of the link transmit at any given time. So if we look at on the diagram and the photo on the right, you can see that there are units on the towers which transmit. Some of them can transmit, some of them can receive. This is the case where we can expect interference on the tower, because if someone is receiving and someone is transmitting, we can expect interference. Collocated radios generate self-interference in case the TDD frames are not synchronized. This is the major problem. When several radios are collocated at the same site, interference may occur between them. It may happen when one collocated unit is transmitting and the other is receiving at the same time. The idea is to either to listen, either to transmit, but all the audios, all the units on the same tower need to behave at the same manner, either to transmit, either to receive. Now, when there is interference, and because of self-interference, we can expect significantly reduces the throughput due to lower modulation. Of course, when there is interference, the signal become interfered and the modulation getting lower because of the C2I and the sensitivity. Decrease the signal to noise by 20 to 15 dBm and reduce, of course, the coverage area. The self-interference can be mitigated by. Now I will provide you a little bit solutions for this self-interference, how to mitigate it. Increase frequency separation between collocated units. We need to distribute the frequency to different and the gap between the frequencies need to be higher and bigger, but not always the frequency is available. Sometimes it's licensed band, sometimes it is in unlicensed band. So the frequency, it doesn't available. So we are limited to very narrow channel bandwidth because of licensed band, probably, or because unlicensed band, but we are limited to use chop of frequency. So the problematic with limited spectrum and high number of links, we don't have enough spectrum. The second solution is increase the physical separation between collocated units. It means that we can physically separate in height between different ODUs and units that are deployed on the tower. This requires a tower space. You can imagine if we have a big antenna and sometimes we have a external antenna, it takes place on the tower and physical separation sometimes is not possible. And it takes up space. We can reduce the TX power. And of course, in ETSI, in European standard, it taken into consideration where you need to reduce the AARP, but reducing the TX power will impact the coverage area. It will impact the performance and reduce the performance. So all this technique, having a higher gap of distribution of frequency, tower space, physically separation, or reducing the TX power, they need to consider, but it's not ideal in case of we're looking for a solution. Now, the best solution, which we are recommended, is synchronization. But we can synchronize RADWIN equipment, but we cannot synchronize other vendors. If the solution is based on RADWIN equipment, we can guarantee that we can synchronize our equipment and to guarantee that there will be no self-interference when collocated channels are configured. So synchronization is a technique to eliminate collocated interference by aligning the frame of all links in the network in a manner that transmit burst of audio does not overlap the received burst of a collocated unit. So we can guarantee and ensure that only the unit on the tower can either transmit simultaneously or either receive simultaneously, like it is shown in the picture below. We either receive or either transmit. Synchronization ensures that all collocated units transmit and receive at the same time. Now we are going to discuss, and I will show you the technique that we are going to synchronize and how it's done on the same tower and how it is done on between towers. And remember that it's about the TDD synchronization. So TDD, it means time division. So we need to synchronize the TX and the RX. And we can determine the duty cycle of the pulses that are being transmitted. Actually, this is the clock that we are providing to all our devices that are deployed or installed on the same tower or between towers. So you can see that if there is a shift of phase between the TX and the RX, between TX or RX, we can expect self-interference. It means that while I'm transmitting, I can expect that someone is receiving, and the clock is not synchronized between all the devices that are deployed on the same tower. And when it is synchronized, it means that there is no shift phase, and there is harmonic between the TX and between the RX. When the radios are synchronized, they all are singing at the same rhythm. It means that either all of them transmit or either all of them receive. When synchronization is needed. Of course, in RADWIN, we can distinguish between different topologies of installation and deployment. And synchronization is mandatory when two or more multiple radios are deployed at the same tower. It can be the same tower or different towers, and then we need to think about different kind of synchronization according to the topology that we have in the network. We distinguish between different topologies for point-to-point and different topologies for point-to-multipoint and a mixed configuration. The first topology is point-to-point in a cascade topology, where you need to chain point-to-point link and to aggregate point-to-point links. The second is a star topology, where there is a central control location, and there is a star where from the star are getting and deploying different point-to-point links. Usually, at the middle, we will deploy the base station. We will put the base station, and at the remote side, like a star, we will put the subscriber unit for each point-to-point link. And then I will explain why we will usually put the base station at the middle. Now, the third topology is two or more base stations that are collocated on the same tower. We have a point-to-multipoint solution where we need to cover 360 degrees. We will put 4 base stations in 90 degrees. Each one of them is facing different angle or different sector. In this topology, we need to synchronize all the base stations to the same clock. The fourth is two or more base stations that are located on separate nearby towers. It means that we have a full deployment of point-to-multipoint. We have 360 degrees in each tower, and we need to synchronize all the base stations in a neighborhood or in a city to the same clock. Otherwise, they will start to transmit or receive or transmit. You will never know. They will continue to interfering. You will get instability. You will get deterioration of performance, like we explained before. And then you need to think how to synchronize the solution. The fifth topology is a mixed point-to-multipoint base station and a point-to-point located on the same tower. Now, usually in a deployment, you deploy point-to-multipoint. Sometimes you cannot cover with point-to-multipoint all the area. We need to bypass obstacle or line of sight, near line of sight, no line of sight. Sometimes you need to aggregate between base stations, so you put point-to-point link in a bigger pipe of capacity to aggregate between different base station sites. So All of this topology need to be considered while we are going to deploy to consider the synchronization. How to properly synchronize between all these solutions and all these configuration. The parameters that need to be considered while we are going to consider synchronization is the allocated channel frequency, which spectrum is available. Of course, the chops of channels, the channel bandwidth, we can work in 10, 20, 40, 80 megahertz channel bandwidth. And of course, the more you're exposed, the more the channel bandwidth is bigger, you are more exposed to interference. It's the same. RADWIN equipment can interfere, RADWIN equipment, same like cambium interfere RADWIN or other unit interfere, ubiquity on the tower interfere RADWIN. The only thing is that RADWIN have a solution for this, is to synchronize RADWIN equipment. And when we are synchronized, we don't expect self-interference. So the other parameters that need to be considered is the distance between audio on the same tower, the distance between collocated cascade point-to-point site, the radius distance between collocated point to multi-point base station site coverage, the level of frequency reuse required. And the guys who participated in the former lecture that I did, you know that RADWIN can provide frequency reuse too, where you can put two back-to-back base stations. Now imagine that we can put back-to-back base station with the same frequency while they are not synchronized. If they are not synchronized, they will start to interfere each other, regardless the fact that we have a narrow beam forming and a nice technology. They will interfere. Now, remember that I told you that if you remember, if you go backward, this is a clock, actually. You can see the TX duty cycle and the RX duty cycle. It can be 50-50, it can be 80-20. You can control the duty cycle of the clock and the timing of the clock. It means that once we are changing the duty cycle and the rhythm of the uplink, the ticks and the RX, we can easily change and impact the uplink and downlink ratio. And that is why when we are synchronized, we need to make sure that all the ODUs on the same tower or sometimes between the towers need to sync on the same uplink and downlink ratio. The other issue, the benefit and the advantage here, that RADWIN has the capability to provide to our customer any kind of uplink or downlink ratio which is flexible. You just imagine between 10 and 90% of the uplink downlink, you can put any kind of ratio, and you cannot, and you will be able to put any kind of ratio. It's a flexible, it's changeable. You can put any ratio that you need. So this is the advantage of the TDD, by the way. But when you are synchronized, remember that all the ODUs need to be on the same uplink and downlink ratio, because the clock impact the TX and the RX duty cycle. This is an example of RADWIN R planner, where we have the capability to look at the synchronization aspect and to provide you a clear understanding how synchronization needs to be. The tool, the R planner tool, give you the exact instruction, how to synchronize, how to properly synchronize. So in this picture, you can see that all the links are synchronized because they are green. You can see the client, the dependent clock, and the client clock. And of course, when we speak about clocking, there must be a master clock. And I will discuss it very soon. The next slide shows you that there are links which are not synchronized. Those are the red one. The link is red because of lack of synchronization. It means that point-to-point links are disturbing the point-to-multipoint links and causing an interference. As we explained before, interference means performance degradation. Lower C2I impact modulation and throughput. It will impact the throughput, it will impact the stability of the link. Sometimes you have links that coming and going and losing their synchronization, and the service is affecting. It is because of lack of synchronization. Without synchronization, we expect high interference. You can look on the left where we can identify exactly which are the links or the point-to-point or the entity that interfere. Links which are not interfering are in -90, -100, they are not interfering. But links that are interfered and they are not synchronized will definitely interfere, and we can expect high level of interference. Now, let me reduce a little bit and go back a little bit to the real R planner. You can see this is the R planner. This is the tool. And if I right-click on the red link, you can see that there is interference. The link is red. The RSS become worse, and you can see that there are interference and the level of interference, and you can identify the source of the interference. This is how it's done in RADWIN R planner, and let's look at the different angle where the link are synchronized. You can see the link is synchronization. And you can expect the RSS to become much better and the modulation much better, and the link is available in 99.9 and the status is green. So RADWIN has the tools to identify the synchronization and the interfere source in case of lack of synchronization, and can explain the behavior of each link and the performance according to interference. We can analyze the synchronization. So if we go to the radio layers, you can see that there is a hub site synchronization, and we can identify the entities that are providing the clock and the entities that are inherent the clock from the master clock. There are entities which are client, there are entities which are master, and there are entities which are inherent the clock from the master. So I can go back to the presentation and show you how it's done in RADWIN, how it is simply done in RADWIN. The idea is to be aware of the need of synchronization and how to do it properly. So the synchronization method, there are intra-site synchronization at the same tower. At the same tower, there must be one unit, which is the master clock, and the master clock provides the clock to the other client. The synchronization is performed by defining one of the hub side radio as the master, called HSM, and the rest of the hub side radio as client unit, CU. Now, there is a master, or there are slave, client. The CUs adapt the frequency and the phase of the HSM as well as other TDMA parameters such as TX-arc ratio and the radio frame duration. So once the master provides the clock and you define the master, the client, which are the slave, will inherit the duty cycle, entirely the duty cycle of the TX-arc. It means that it will impact also the uplink downlink according to the uplink downlink ratio that you defined on the master. Now, this is called the intra-site synchronization, where on the same tower. In order to synchronize the same intra-synchronized units on the same tower, we have two kinds of methods to do it. The first, which is a little bit old, it is the RS-232 using serial synchronization. We used to, and currently there are still RADWIN 2000 and 5000 that are supporting the serial, the RS-232, where you need to drop cables from each unit to the HSSU unit, and you need to do the clockwise synchronization, and the physical connection need to be taken care where it is from the master towards the slaves in a clockwise manner. Because it is a chain and it is RS-232, the cables need to be in a clockwise, and there must be a chain between the master and the other slave unit. The disadvantage, you need to have cables, RS-232 cables, that are going all the way from the subscriber, from each master to the unit, HSSU. The length of the cable is limited to 150 meters for each direction, because this is the RS-232 protocol. And it is very complicated and requires too many cables that going up and down in the tower. The recommended and the popular and the useful synchronization is over Ethernet, where we provide broadcast of Ethernet packet to synchronize RADWIN audios on the same tower. You may use RADWIN IDOH or layer 2 Ethernet switch to support the synchronization. You can use IDOH or any layer 2 Giga Ethernet switch like the IDOH, and now we are coming with IDOS, which is a configurable layer 2 switch. Sync frames are exchanged between collocated audios using the layer 2 broadcasting. You need to have the master, and the master provides the clock to the other slave unit over Ethernet packet, which is our broadcast. Because they are broadcasting, they can congest our network, and we have a solution how to avoid congesting of broadcasting in the network by VLAN or by domain. I will explain it in 2 slides later. But before if you go a little bit backward, the master providing the clock to the other subscriber, to the other serial unit. And in many policies, by the way, in many countries, if there is no synchronization, the interfered entity needs to stop transmitting. And this is an additional cause or additional reason why we need to synchronize. So the popular and the most common synchronization method is over Ethernet, where we need a layer 2 switch, Giga Ethernet switch. The other units are connected to the same switch, and for the packets are going between the master clock and the other entities, the audios over Ethernet. Ethernet connectivity is required between collocated units using any one of IDOH, IDOS, or Giga Ethernet layer 2 switch. Link signal are exchanged between collocated radios over the regular Ethernet connection, the PoE cable, the Cat5e or the Cat6 cable between the master and the other ODUs. HSS cables are not required. The RS-232 cable, which we used here, not required here, and this is saving cost and saving effort to implement synchronization, which is basically need to be easy to be done and implement. VLAN is used to separate sync frame from user traffic to avoid broadcasting, and each collocated ODU is configured with an internal domain name. This is the way we can avoid broadcasting between different domains or between different VLANs. To avoid or minimize self-interference, follow this recommendation. For collocated RADWIN units, use HSS unit, the master clock between them. Only one unit is required to be the master when the other are slave. Remember, the other called slave and other words for slave is client. The client inherits the clock from the master. In both point-to-point and point-to-multipoint, only the HBS can carry the sync packet. In a star topology, point-to-point, the base station for D+, the base station for A+, the base station for C+, need to be at the center, because only the base station can inherit the clock from the master or become the master. And this is a rule that needs to be remembered. If one or more collocated units are not RADWIN, ensure that there is a physical separation of at least 3 meters between the RADWIN unit and any other collocated unit on the same site. So, if it is RADWIN, one unit becomes the master. If it is not RADWIN, we cannot synchronize with Cambium, we cannot synchronize with Ubiquity. The best is to separate, physically separate, or to have a gap between the channels, the frequency channels between our and other vendors. Again, if it is RADWIN related to one WISP or other WISP, it doesn't matter. We can synchronize RADWIN equipment and to avoid self-interference. So this is an example of a tower where there is a base station in point-to-multipoint distribution. There is a 360 degrees or more base station each one of them in, let's say, 5.x or 3.x, there must be a master. One of them needs to be configured the master, all the other base stations need to be the slave, and the packets of the synchronization are going to the switch, layer 2 switch. It can be IDOH, and synchronize the other devices on the same tower. Collocated HBS radio can share the same pole or space to extend the overall site coverage. Mutual interference are avoided with RADWIN upside synchronization system. One of them is the master, the other are client, and this is the way how to synchronize point to multi-point in a tower where the base stations are deployed. In point-to-point solution, we need to do the same. We have one unit become the master, the other slave. Remember that only base station can generate or inherit the clock. Subscriber unit cannot get the clock. You cannot synchronize subscriber with the base because the subscriber is inheriting the clock from its parent, from its base station. So in a point to multi-point solution, the base station can be the master, the subscriber inherit the clock from the base station. Now, in 2000 point-to-point, we need the same method. One of the units becomes the master. Remember, only base station can be the master or the slave to get the clock. Now, we can implement the synchronization with serial cables like the RS-232 cable, or synchronize over Ethernet, or synchronize with GPS, which are going to discuss it later when we discuss inter-site synchronization. To prevent network flooding, each group of collocated ODUs is configured with internal domain name or a VLAN. This is to avoid congestion of broadcasting packets that will run in our network and flood the network. That is why we will put blue domain or green domain to avoid flooding of broadcast packets that will congest our network. So if I summarize the intra-synchronization, only one unit needs to be the synchronization, the master. All the other units on the same tower need to be the slave, or what we call client, and they will inherit the clock from the master. Only base station can generate or receive clock. Subscriber unit cannot get or synchronize with any entity. He will inherit the clock from the base station. That is why it will be independent. Now, between sites, point to multi-point, point-to-point and point-to-multi-point, inter-site TDD synchronization. You can imagine here where we have a full deployment of point-to-multi-point base station. This is the case one. We have full deployment of point-to-point in a city or between towers. And now I will go with you with a challenge to guess which is transmitting and which is receiving.
Sure.
Now,
sure.
Yeah.
I would like to interfere. There is a question keep rising up again. If you can explain again how the synchronization actually works when you're transmitting, how it affects the other links, why it's important to have the synchronization, meaning if I transmit, all of the units are transmitting at the same time, and if it's received, all of the units are receiving, thus not interfering with one another. If you can show it again on the presentation.
Yeah, I will do it. I will definitely do it. And
okay.
when I'm looking at this line, it will give us a little bit explanation regarding the question. Let's say that, remember that the idea is that all the ODUs at the same tower need to be either transmit or either receive, not to interfere each other. This is the rule. Now, I can say that, let's say that this unit is transmitting, this is the master, and if the master is providing the clock, it is a clock provider. Now, if I have the clock provider, the master, to the other slave, I can ensure that the master is transmitting. I can ensure that all the slaves on the same tower will be transmitting at the same time, because they will get the clock from the master. Remember, the master provides the clock. It's like NTP clock. They get the pulse, and they are singing and dancing at the same rhythm. Now, I can say definitely that if the master is transmitting, I can say that and can determine that the other side is receiving. Now, what about this one? Let's look at the tower at the middle. Can you say that this is transmit or receive? I cannot tell you definitely. Maybe this is receiving, and then they are synchronized. And maybe it is transmitting, and then on the middle side, on the middle tower, they will interfere. And there is the question mark. Which one of them is transmitting and which one is receiving? I cannot tell. I have a solution for this, but let's look at it later. Before I will go backward to answer the question. Now, on intra, when I discuss an intra, I need one unit to be the master clock. Now, remember, this is the clock. If I go backward, this is the clock. The master provides the clock. Now, you can say that this is the master. The blue one is the master, and the orange, they are the slave. All the slave will get the same clock from the master. So if there is a master and the master is TX, I can guarantee that all of them will get the same clock and all of them will transmit at the same time. Again, if they are synchronized and the duty cycle is 50-50, I can tell you for sure that if the master is transmitting, all the slaves will transmit at the same time and receive at the same time. That is why we need master clock. This is the master. This is the master. He will provide the same clock to all the subscriber or the client at the same time. How it is done? It's done by packet, by clock packet, like it's done in the NTP protocol over Ethernet, how it's implemented in time protocol over the Ethernet. And then I can ensure that if one of them is transmitting, all of them are transmitting, and if all of them are receiving, I can ensure that all of them are receiving at the same time. This is how they will sing and dance at the same and correlated to the same period of time. Now, I hope that I explained it. When we discussed about, this was the intra. Now we have the same challenge when we have inter-site synchronization, where I can expect interference that is coming from different towers or different deployment in the same environment. This is dependent on the distance between the towers and the coverage of the base station. Let's say 5 kilometers, 7 kilometers, we need to take care of this synchronization. If it is above 10 kilometers, I can disregard the need of synchronization. But in the same tower, the same neighborhood, the same city, when there is a dense deployment, I need to take care of synchronization. This is a good example. We have a tower that is transmitting. I can say definitely that the other side will receive, but I cannot tell you what are the other towers are handling, or they can be transmitting or they can be receiving, but I cannot tell. But I want to influence this. I want to determine the clock, whether it transmits, whether it receives on the same deployment. How do I do it? The solution for this is external or integrated GPS. When you get the clock from a satellite, I can tell you definitely that I can synchronize from external clock or GPS clock the entire deployment. So this is how I can influence the clock between towers, what we call inter-synchronization. The GPS can be either integrated because of the jet platform, which the GPS and the antenna is integrated, or by external GSU. Inter-site synchronization between towers. GPS-based synchronization is used to mitigate inter-site interference in a large-scale deployment scenario. If it is 5 kilometers, 7 kilometers, I need to take care of GPS or inter-synchronization to avoid self-interference that is coming from other side. RADWIN GSU is an outdoor unit consisting on an outdoor enclosure, a GPS antenna, and a PoE device. The GSU synchronizes the transmitting timing of multiple hub sites to the same clock source, thus eliminating mutual interference. So we have a device that provides us the clock from the satellite. Now, if it gets the satellite clock, I can definitely say that all the towers that getting the clock from the satellite will be either transmitting or either receiving on the same timing. The GSU receives synchronization signal from GPS once per second. The GSU is designed to handle intersite interference under large-scale deployment. It synchronizes the transmission timing of multiple hub sites to the same clock. Outdoor unit consisting of a standard wireless link enclosure, a GPS antenna, and a PoE device. And again, at the end, it's interpreted to Ethernet packets, which are broadcasting and providing the duty cycle and the clock to the other slave. Remember a rule: when the GPS is installed and deployed, the GPS becomes the master. In every tower where there is a GSU, the GSU provides the clock to the other slave, and the GSU becomes the master to the other entities in the tower. So if I can say that, now, remember the question, I can say that I can assume that when I have a tower which is synchronized with intra-synchronization, all the entities and the devices under the same tower are getting the same clock from the master. and all of them are either transmitting simultaneously or either receiving simultaneously. Now, the challenge was, and the conflict was, to determine the second link, either it is receiving or transmitting. The second tower, if I can assume that the first tower is transmitting, I can say that this unit is definitely receiving, but I don't know what about the third leg of this deployment. I can only imagine or assume that it can be either receiving or either transmitting. Now, to avoid interference, I need to guarantee that the second tower, all the units will be receiving. There is a solution. The solution is to get the clock from the GPS unit, the GSU. We can say the GSU is transmitting. It transmits on the first tower, it transmits on the second tower, and it transmits on the third tower. However, on the second tower, I will shift the TX phase that it will become RX. And again, for all of the guy who asked, at the end it is a clock, it is a pulse that it's providing the same clock to all the entities. It doesn't matter if it is intra or inter, but in an inter solution, we need a GPS, a GSU solution. And in order to determine that the second tower, all of the entities will be receiving, I need to shift the phase and to get RX instead of TX. And I need to shift in 90 degrees the TX and the RX. Sync between the half-side sync is required in dense and large-scale network. Remember, 5 kilometers, 7-leg network. If the network is deployed in urban area, in a dense urban area, we need to avoid collocated interference by key synchronization with a GPS unit. The GSU can synchronize the TDD's timing of several sites, enabling the cascading of consecutive links without mutual interference. Now, the JET point-to-multipoint platform has the GPS integrated. So it makes our life easier. If you have an entire deployment of point-to-multipoint JET, you just need to enable the integrated GPS. There's no need for external GSU. You don't need to invest in another unit in the tower. You just need to enable the GPS, the integrated GPS, in each one of the base stations. RADWIN JET system have built-in GPS receiver, which is used for intra-site and inter-site synchronization. The built-in GPS clock source eliminates the need for installation of GSU, greatly simplify base station setup and maintenance. Now, if you look at the photo and the slide, you just need to enable the GPS. And on the right side, you can see the shifted, where you need to shift the phase according to the requirement of the deployment that you are doing. Sometimes you need to shift the GPS clock in order to receive harmony between TX and RX between towers. When you have a JET, it's easy to implement it because you just need to enable it and it is easily and simply to deploy. So if we have a full deployment of Jet or Jet Duo, they will inherit the clock from the GPS. Or, when you have a Jet base station deployment, you just need to enable the integrated GPS, and you are totally synchronized for inter and intra. Because the source of the clock is a satellite. The next slide shows you how to implement full synchronization and how to consider synchronization when we have alpha point-to-point deployment on a tower, and it gives you the different combinations that you can achieve full intra-synchronization with when you are going to deploy alpha. I'm not going to follow each step, but the idea is you can have either GSU for inter, or you need a master clock to provide the clock to the alpha, because the alpha currently cannot be the master clock, and this is a limitation. When you cannot be the master, you need to inherit the clock from either GSU for inter, synchronization and intra, or either another device need to be the master clock to provide the clock to the alpha, which is a slave. So what we studied today, the main conclusion is to listen to your wife. No, seriously. The main conclusion that you need to synchronize. Collocated radius generated self-interference that may significantly reduce the link performance. That is why we need to consider about synchronization. In a dense environment, in a tower where there is more than one audio, RADWIN audio need to be synchronized. There must be a master. When GSU is deployed to provide inter-synchronization, GSU becomes the master. This is the rule. Synchronization is the optimal solution for self-interference. It's avoiding tower space on the tower. It's avoiding different distribution of frequency. So when we are considering this synchronization, we are guaranteed that our RADWIN equipment will not disturb the environment and will not interfere the other deployment. RADWIN provides multiple solutions for intra and inter synchronization, such hub side sync over serial, which is the old method with RS-232 cable, and the new method, the optimal method, HSS over Ethernet, and GSU for GPS synchronization. RADWIN Jet audio have integrated GPS for intra and inter-site synchronization, significantly simplifies the setup and the configuration, eliminating the need for external GSU. RADWIN TDD synchronization adjusts the uplink and downlink ratio control. It means that when you are playing with the ratio of the master, it will all the slaves under the same tower or between towers, which is the master, will inherit the same uplink and downlink ratio. That is why we have flexible ratio to adjust. We can adjust between 10 and 90 uplink, downlink, any kind of ratio. It's not fixed. like other vendors. You have the flexibility to determine the ratio, and it can be any ratio of uplink and downlink. Remember, because we are TDD and we can adjust the clock according to the master, and all the slaves under the same tower will inherit the clock from a master. The GPS, when you deploy a GPS and a GSU, an external GSU, you need to make sure about the uplink downlink ratio, especially when you are running CCTV or video, where you need more uplink than downlink. And when you shift the phase, it can damage or impact the uplink downlink ratio from different entity towards the control center. And this is something that needs to be considered carefully when you are deploying and adding a GSU for inter-synchronization. Eldad, are there any questions that require my clarification?
Some people ask about exactly how does it work when the master is failing, what's going on, how the synchronization continues to work.
Okay.
Also, they pretty much answered everything. So this is the only question that I think you might repeat. How the system operates and the master synchronization is.
Okay, good.
And
Now,
also just emphasize exactly the idea behind the clock. Some people ask, what clock are we using? So we are using the internal clock. Either it's the master clock or the GPS clock, which is an external clock, or we use the internal clock as a result that the GPS or the master clock is failing. Okay?
Okay. First, for intra-synchronization on the same tower, we are using a master. The master is internal clock that provides the clock to the slave unit. Of course, in other networking, generally in networking, there is a master clock. It can be atomic clock that provide the clock to the other entities. In the 3G, 4G, there is a TC, transparent clock, and the clock is provided with atomic clock. In our case, one of the ODUs provided its own clock, internal clock, to the other elements in the tower. If it is a GSU, then the GSU becomes the master clock and it provides the clock to the other entity. It is an internal clock based on RADWIN philosophy or RADWIN TDD air interface. So it is internal clock. We can support also transparent clock. The D+ point-to-point provide and support, and also in the transportation life, we support transparent clock where you can inherit the clock from atomic clock and then calculate the delay between the switches and the hops in the network. So actually we are internal clock and we provide the clock to all our entities according to their interface. Now, what happens if the master clock is dropped or shut down? In this case, there will be no clock. There will be no synchronization. Now, there will be no synchronization, and all of them will be what we call free running. They will not inherit the clock, and each one of them will work according to its own clock. They will interfere each other like any other devices, any other vendors that are disturbing and interfering the network and the network performance. Now, there are two methods. It's a good question, actually. There are two methods that saying that one philosophy said that if you are not synchronized and there is no source of clock, you need to stop transmitting in order to not to interfere the environment. The other philosophy said that you can continue to transmit because it's service affecting and you need to continue to transmit. Let's say in ETSI, for example, RAD ETSI in RAD ETSI regulation, you need to stop transmitting for a period of 30 minutes, and you don't have any service. In our case, there is one master clock, and the clock is inherent. The slave are inherent the internal clock from the master. There's no backup for clocking. Once the master is dropped, the other slave will continue to transmit, but they will probably interfere the other devices, in transportation, for example, we thought about it, and because of the sensitivity of transportation, we have ISU, which is indoor synchronization unit, and the indoor synchronization unit is there is a master and a slave, and the master provides the clock, and if the master is broke, the slave will continue to provide the clocking to the other entities in the transportation. This is because of the sensitivity of the train. They need to be synchronized always and be synchronized with the control. Some of the trains are remotely controlled and unmanned control. So there is a significant importance to have a clock always. In the residential or enterprise, the idea of interference, it's important, but not so significant. It's not saving life. So if the master is dropped, we don't have a redundant clock. Although we can implement the same method that is done in the transportation for security, but most of the services that we are providing in the BWA are not security, and they are secured, but it's not life-saving. So we can say that if the master drop or the GPS drop, the GSU unit, we have no backup. Of course, that we can go manually change one of the slaves to be the master, and this is a simple and easy solution. Just to go to the configuration, change from slave to master, and you have a master. But it requires manual interfering to change the configuration. This is the answer for this. Remember, synchronization is important. I see a lot of sites or deployment which synchronization are not done, and this causing a lot of issues in performance issues and stability issues. I would like to thank you for listening, and probably I will meet you during the next webinars. Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening. Thank you, Eldad, for answering the question, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.